Hello everyone, Bran here, and in this video we're going to be discussing negativity bias and its relation to the DBT community.
By daylight.
It's been something that's been on my mind a great deal as of late. Day after day, logging in and seeing Twitter posts just dragging the game and its developers over and over and over again. Slowly waning away from watching some of my favorite streamers because of their constant seething vitriol for the game and its current state. Some days I come onto social media, I'm bright, I'm excited, but I leave it drained and deflated by seeing so much negativity surrounding this game. This is by no means new. This has been a plague that's sickened the community since I've been a part of it, and long before it. And I find myself wondering over and over with this overwhelming bleakness, is any of this real? Is any of this justified? Well, I think back to one of the most well-known idioms, the grain of truth. The grain of truth. A grain of truth is defined as a little bit of truth, often used to refer to a small amount of insight or truth in something otherwise false or nonsensical. People don't feel things for no reason. Feelings are valid, but the things that cause them, not always. But there's often a grain of truth to them, because something instigated those feelings in the first place. The grain, so to speak. And understanding what really happened as opposed to our feelings that came as a result is equally important. However, this is often incredibly difficult. Feelings are powerful and can dictate our minds to preserve what we felt happened over what actually happened, even if we consciously know better than what our feelings are telling us. And there's a very real science to this, and that's where negativity bias comes in. TheDecisionLab.com defines negativity bias as a cognitive bias that results in adverse events having a more significant impact on our psychological state than positive events. Negativity bias occurs when adverse events and positive events are of the same magnitude, meaning that we feel negative events more intensely. This definition comes from a research study conducted by ITO and colleagues in 1998. In that study, participants responded more intensively to negative stimuli than to positive or neutral stimuli. The research study was conducted by showing 30 participants photographs and measuring their brain's electrical activity. The research study found that images that generated the most brain activity occurred when participants viewed the negative images. Too long didn't listen, we naturally treat negative events as more important than positive ones. For example, you roll out of bed, you get ready for work, and you throw on your favorite podcast while you're getting dressed. You're out the door and you put the podcast on in your car. You're pretty ahead of schedule, so you decide to grab yourself some McDonald's breakfast on the way. You make it to work, coffee in hand, and you're feeling productive. Hours pass, everything's going by the books, and you get your break. But while in the break room, your boss stops by. He tells you that it's getting pretty busy and he needs you to leave your break a little bit early. You try to be polite and resist because you're on break, but then your boss makes an offhanded comment that just bothers you. I don't pay you to eat, I pay you to work. Something like that. And it just gets under your skin. It's an awful thing to say, if not at the very least, aggressive. So you huff and you puff, and you power through the last part of your workday. You get home and your roommate asks, "How was work?" And you say, "It sucked." Despite getting up early, despite having your favorite podcast on, despite getting a nice breakfast, having a pretty laid-back day up until your break, you say you had a bad day. Because of that one moment where you had your break ended early because of your jerk of a boss. All of the good things that led up until that moment are out the door because of that one sucky situation. Now, to be upset about this is completely understandable, hence there's the grain of truth. The whole day wasn't sucky, but there was a really sucky part of it. Now, some might frame this as you have a weak mind or willpower for perceiving the day as being a bad one just because of one small bad incident compared to the load of good, but that may not be true either. Researchers suggest that negativity bias may be ultimately tied to something evolutionary in our brains. Just think about it. A caveman being extremely paranoid for bears likely lived over a caveman that was more carefree and lazy. So we may not even have full control over this, as it might be some leftover survival instinct that our mind has carried over from when we weren't the top of the food chain. Nevertheless, we still feed into this part of our minds, extinctual or not. We are always, in a sense, looking for the danger.
I am the danger.
Bad news usually does better than good news. Tweets that are critical often do better than those that are being congratulatory. The list goes on. In a sense, the negativity bias is adapted to our social world, as we pine for the knowledge in the same way that we would the caveman that was being paranoid for the bear did. We're looking for the danger. So much that we are more likely to accept information and news that seems negative and worrisome because listening to it may put us in a safer place. You feel smarter, you feel safer, and you feel ahead of the curve, even if you're not. And this leads us back to Dead by Daylight. You've seen a lot of DBD content creators over the years gain a vast following across multiple platforms for being extremely negative towards the game and its developers. People flock to it because why would someone warn us of a danger that doesn't actually exist? It certainly won't be to emotionally exaggerate or gain views and subscribers or anything like that. If a content creator is being intensely critical, there has to be a reason for it. Your brain buys into that because psychology supports it, and then YouTube and Twitch bolster that content because of the intention that the negativity gained, and it all landslides from that point on. However, it is important to make the distinction here that criticism doesn't equal negativity.
Hey guys, Scott here.
Scott Jund is probably one of the most prolific DBD creators that's tied to criticism. He built his place in the DBD community by making commentary videos which a majority of the time call into question the thoughts and decisions of behavior and what they do to Dead by Daylight. The difference being that often, Scott usually clearly defines his problems with the game and then provides some sort of solution to the issue. For example, right now, despite not necessarily agreeing with the community's outrage, Scott has talked about the issues with current solo queue and has made mock-ups in order to fix the issues with that current mode of play. Could you call his videos negative? Perhaps. But when you disagree in a productive and professional manner, it definitely errs more on the side of criticism. However, this is not usually the way in which the DBD community usually handles their issues with the game. Often, those that try to make mock-ups or provide concrete solutions for the problems in the game get met with harsh debate and sometimes outright harassment. Insults, schoolyard bullying, all run rampant in the community. At a certain point, we start to feel like a snake that's eating itself. We are so negative that often the negativity eclipses any actual progress towards a better game or community. Just look at the mess that's on the DBD forums. You can find people complaining left, up, right, down, trampling all over each other to try to have their woes about the game loudly voiced and attended to. Survivor issues, killer issues, it seems like both are being underrepresented and catered to at the same time. All of these can't be feasibly happening at once, especially when statements really start directly opposing each other. It's not hard to see that the community is being pulled underwater here in this sea of negativity. But are we really in the peril that's being displayed here? The most extreme opinions always dominate the most conversation. It's because they're often wild, sensational, and hard to ignore. A lot of this walks side by side with negativity. But the reality is many of those people, despite how loud they are a minority. Whether people are complete shills or doomsayers, these people are few and far between in reality. And often, in Dead by Daylight, the people speaking the loudest are the ones who have platforms. Look at how many people didn't even know about the Oni bug before Scott Jund made a video about it compared to how many people knew after that video was released. And there are a lot of content creators out there in the DBD community. It's hard to go 2 games in DBD without having a TTV in your lobby, and all of them have an opinion about the game and a group of people that they want to share it with. But most people who play Dead by Daylight play the game casually and aren't tied to those mouthpieces. They're just playing the game. But what happens when even those people feel negative about the game? Before we close, I wanted to touch briefly on the other side of this. How does someone who's insulated from the general community of DBD still feel negative about the game? It's because of the grain of truth. There's always a catalyst to our feelings, and sometimes those catalysts get a warranted response. You can point to a lot of reasons why the community is overwhelmingly negative. Negativity bias, content creators pushing hate on the game or the developers, even survival. But in the end, we still have that grain of truth. A term that's thrown around a lot in the DBD community is parroting, which is loosely defined as echoing a statement you heard just because it was said by someone knowledgeable, as opposed to because you understand and agree with it. And I think this term is mostly disingenuous. I think a lot of people feel upset and lost sometimes. Feelings are hard. and even harder to understand. And when you hear someone finally put words to your feelings, suddenly you feel acceptance and care because somebody finally got you. We brought up earlier that negativity bias is just possibly natural. It's natural for human beings to look out for danger. But you know what else is human? Togetherness. Sticking by each other. And being there for one another. You may think the purpose of this video so far was to imply that negative opinions about DBD are fundamentally wrong. That you always have to hold the more moderate and neutral idea set to be taken seriously. And that's not always the case. The purpose of this video is a caution for mindfulness. There are plenty of things to be upset in DBD right now, and to be frank, there always will be. It will never be a perfect game, and you'll never be the perfect player for that game.
I think we did a pretty good job so far.
There are some changes that may just be objectively bad. That's going to draw some ire. It's okay to be mad, frustrated, and dejected when your favorite game changes. That's completely understandable. Just as much as we need to be mindful and aware of the negativity bias and the loudness of extreme voices, we also need to be aware of that grain of truth of what upset them in the first place. The last concept I'll leave you with today is emotional validation. The process of learning about, understanding, and expressing acceptance of another person's emotional experience. Very Well Mind puts it the best when they say, validating an emotion doesn't mean that we have to agree with the other person, or that you think their emotional response is even warranted. Rather, you demonstrate that you understand what they are feeling without trying to talk them out of it or shame them for it. We all play the same game together, love it or hate it, positive or negative. We can all empathize with that feeling of, man, I wish they'd just fix this, or gosh, I hope they change this. We've all been there. And we don't have to agree to be together. But what we do have to do is understand.